2017, Savannah, Georgia. The morning air was thick with humidity as the residents of Greenstone Avenue prepared for their usual routines. Children headed to school, parents sipped coffee, and neighbors exchanged polite waves. But for the Marsh family, the day was anything but typical. Adam Marsh, his wife Linda, and their 20-year-old son Evan hadn't been seen in days. Adam, a respected attorney in town, was the kind of man people admired, always confident, charming, and endlessly committed to his career. Linda, on the other hand, had chosen a quieter life as a stay-at-home mother, doting on Evan, who had recently returned home after dropping out of college. He hadn't told anyone why, and few had dared to ask. As days passed with no sign of the family, whispers began to circulate. The Marshes weren't the type to vanish without a word, and yet here they were, gone without a trace. A month earlier, everything seemed normal. Adam and Linda were hosting a small get-together at their home, a modest gathering of friends and colleagues. The Marsh home was a place of comfort, pictures of family vacations, well-kept furniture, and the aroma of Linda's cooking filling the space. It felt like the perfect suburban family, but, like every perfect picture, there were cracks beneath the surface. Linda had always been proud of their life, but in recent months, something had shifted. Adam was working late more often, and when he was home, his mood was dark and distant. Evan, too, had changed. Since coming back from college, he barely spoke to anyone. He was often locked in his room, and when he did emerge, it was only to slip out into the night without a word. Linda's unease grew, though she couldn't put her finger on what was wrong. She had always trusted Adam, always believed in the family they had built together. But now, something wasn't right. The house felt different, as if secrets lingered in the shadows, just waiting to be discovered. Late one night, when Adam was still out and Evan hadn't come home, Linda found herself walking aimlessly through the quiet halls of their house. As she passed Evan's room, she noticed the door was ajar. Hesitating for a moment, she stepped inside, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't explain. On the desk, she found a stack of notes, scraps of paper with hastily written phrases that made her stomach turn. "I can't keep this hidden much longer," one read. Another, scrawled in a shaky hand, said, "It's going to destroy her." Linda backed away, her pulse racing. She wasn't sure what the notes meant, but she knew they were meant for her. As the days passed, Linda couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Adam's behavior grew colder, and Evan's absences became more frequent. She wanted to confront them, but fear held her back. What if there was more to this than she realized? One night, she followed Adam when he left the house. She trailed him through the winding streets, her heart in her throat, until he disappeared into a small, run-down motel on the outskirts of town. The sight of him slipping into room 17, under the cover of darkness, left her breathless. What was he hiding? Unable to bear the suspense, Linda returned the next night. This time, she saw something far worse. Evan, her son, the boy she had raised, was meeting Adam inside that same room. They were whispering, their voices too low for her to hear, but their body language said enough. Linda's world came crashing down. The secret that had been lurking between them was far darker than she had ever imagined. Adam and Evan had been hiding something that threatened to unravel the life she thought she knew. When Linda confronted Adam, he dismissed her fears, his voice calm, his eyes cold. "You're paranoid, Linda. You've always been like this. Evan's going through a tough time, and you're making it worse." But Linda wasn't convinced. Desperation gnawed at her as she pieced together the fragments of what she had seen, what she had read. She wasn't paranoid. She was sure of it now. There was a conspiracy between Adam and Evan, and she was the outsider. Linda's heart pounded in her chest as she stood frozen in the hallway of their home, her thoughts racing faster than she could control. She had seen enough to know something was terribly wrong, but every time she tried to dig deeper, Adam would brush her off with that icy, dismissive tone. But tonight was different. She couldn't stand the tension any longer. She waited until the house was quiet, the dull hum of the fridge filling the air as she paced outside his room. Her fingers trembled as she raised her hand to knock on the door, 1,000 questions forming in her mind. "Evan, can we talk?" she called out, her voice softer than she intended. No response. She knocked again, this time harder, the nervous energy propelling her forward. Finally, she heard the sound of something rustling behind the door, followed by the faint creak of it opening just a crack. "What is it?" Evan's voice was low, irritated, as he peered through the narrow gap. Linda tried to smile, but it faltered. "I just wanted to check on you. You've been distant lately. I'm worried." Evan's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "I'm fine, Mom. You don't need to worry about me." Linda took a step closer, lowering her voice. "Evan, please. I've seen you and your father meeting. I've seen the notes. What's going on?" For a moment, Evan said nothing. His face was expressionless, his eyes dull. Then, without warning, he opened the door wider and stepped into the hallway, his gaze locking onto hers. "Mom," he began, his tone eerily calm, "you need to stop looking for things that aren't there." His words cut like a knife. There was no emotion behind them, no concern, just a hollow indifference that left her cold. "Evan, I know something's wrong. I'm not imagining this." He shook his head slowly, like he was dealing with a child who didn't understand. "Mom, you need to drop this. It's not what you think." Before she could respond, he turned and shut the door in her face, leaving her standing there, alone in the dim hallway, her heart pounding. As the days dragged on, Linda's anxiety only grew. She could feel the tension in the house thickening like a storm on the horizon, pressing down on her until she could barely breathe. Adam was becoming more and more distant, his late-night absences increasing. Evan, too, seemed to be slipping further away, his once vibrant presence now a shadow that drifted in and out of the house at odd hours. Linda couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was coming. Every time she looked at Adam, she felt the weight of their secrets bearing down on her, and it was suffocating. But worse was the creeping sense of dread that came with each glance at her son. There was something dark behind his eyes now, something she had never seen before. Then, one evening, everything unraveled. Linda was sitting alone in the living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows across the walls, when she heard the front door creak open. Adam's heavy footsteps echoed through the hall as he entered the house, and Linda's heart sank. She hadn't seen him in days, and when she did, it was like he was someone else, a stranger in their home. She stood up, bracing herself as she approached him. "Adam, we need to talk." He didn't stop. He didn't even look at her as he shrugged off his coat and tossed it over the back of the chair. "I don't have time for this, Linda," he muttered, his voice hard and clipped. Linda's chest tightened. "You've been gone for days. You won't talk to me. Evan won't talk to me. What is going on? I can't live like this anymore." Adam paused, his back still to her. For a moment, the silence between them was unbearable. Then he turned around, slowly, and the look in his eyes made her blood run cold. "You're not supposed to know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Linda's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" Adam took a step toward her, his expression unreadable. "You should have just let it go, Linda. But now you've gone too far." Before she could react, there was a movement behind her. Evan appeared in the doorway, his face calm, almost serene, as he stepped into the room. "She's been snooping," Adam said quietly, his eyes never leaving hers. "She knows too much." Linda's breath caught in her throat as she looked from Adam to Evan. the pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. This wasn't just about some secret meetings or cryptic notes. This was something much bigger, something far darker. "You're working together?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What have you done?" Neither of them answered. The silence stretched on, thick with tension, until Linda could feel it pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. "Evan," she began, but her son only stared at her with those cold, empty eyes. "Mom, it's time for you to stop asking questions," he said softly, his tone devoid of emotion. "It's better if you don't know." Linda's pulse quickened. She felt trapped, like the walls were closing in on her, and there was no way out. Adam and Evan had been hiding something terrible, and now they were working together to keep it from her. "I'm leaving," she said, her voice shaking as she backed toward the door. "I'm not staying here another minute." But before she could turn, Adam's hand shot out, grabbing her arm in a vice-like grip. "You're not going anywhere, Linda." Her heart pounded in her ears as she struggled to pull free, but Adam was too strong. He held her in place, his grip tightening as Evan watched from the doorway, his expression unreadable. "What are you going to do?" she gasped, panic rising in her chest. Adam's eyes bore into hers, cold and unfeeling. "You should have just let it go." In a flash, Evan stepped forward, closing the distance between them. He moved quickly, too quickly, his hands outstretched as he reached for her. Linda fought against them both, her pulse racing, but it was no use. They had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. She was never supposed to figure it out. Later that night, Greenstone Avenue was quiet, the streetlights casting faint pools of light on the empty sidewalks. Inside the Marsh house, the living room was eerily still, save for the faint sound of footsteps shuffling through the darkened hallway. Adam and Evan moved in silence, their faces expressionless as they worked quickly, methodically. They knew what they had to do. As they carried her out the back door, the weight of her limp body pressed between them, Adam glanced over at Evan. His son's face was unreadable, his eyes fixed straight ahead as they made their way to the car. "It had to be done," Adam muttered under his breath, more to himself than to Evan. Evan didn't respond. He didn't need to. This was the final act in a long, twisted game they had been playing, and now it was almost over. But as they reached the car, something shifted. Evan stopped, his grip loosening on Linda's lifeless body as he turned to look at his father. "It's not over yet," he said quietly, his voice barely audible in the still night. Adam frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Evan's eyes met his, cold and calculating. "There's still one more thing we need to take care of." For a moment, Adam hesitated, uncertainty flickering across his face. But then he nodded, his jaw clenched tight. "Let's finish this," he said. And together they loaded Linda's body into the trunk, the night swallowing them whole as they drove into the darkness, ready to carry out the final phase of their plan. The tires crunched softly against the gravel road, their noise the only sound breaking the oppressive silence of the dark Georgia night. Adam's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white, his jaw set in a hard line. Beside him, Evan sat unmoving, his gaze fixed straight ahead, his face a mask of eerie calm. Linda's body, now hidden in the trunk, felt like an impossible weight pressing down on both of them. Suddenly, in a flash, Adam was forced to slam on the brakes, and 4 police cars surrounded the car, with sirens blaring and lights flashing. They were ordered to exit the car with hands on their hands, facing away from the police cars. Then, starting with Evan, the policeman ordered them to walk backward towards the police voices. The policeman frisked him before handcuffing him and leading him away towards one of the police cars. In a similar way, Adam was also arrested and led away. His face was like a steel mask as he contemplated that today was probably be the last day he'd be a free man for the rest of his life. His final thought was how ironic it was that he, attorney, sworn to uphold the law, was now going to spend the remainder of his life on the other side as a prisoner. His greatest regret, however, was how he had involved his only son in this awful crime, and in so doing ruined his young life forever.